No one noticed the old man sitting on the cracked sidewalk outside the grocery store. Every morning, he arrived before sunrise with nothing more than a faded backpack, a worn military jacket, and a gentle smile that never seemed to disappear. To the busy shoppers rushing in and out, he was just another homeless man they had learned to ignore. But before this day was over, the entire town would learn that heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes, they wear torn clothes, carry broken hearts, and quietly wait for life to remember their name. Before we begin, if you believe kindness, forgiveness, and second chances can change lives, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone you love, and subscribe to our channel for more emotional stories that stay with you long after they end. The old man's name was Thomas Walker. He was 78 years old, though the deep lines on his face made him look even older. His silver hair was always neatly combed, and every morning he polished the worn leather shoes he had owned for decades. Even though the soles were beginning to separate, he believed a man should respect himself no matter what life had taken away. Every day followed the same routine. He folded the blanket he slept under behind an abandoned warehouse, packed his few belongings, and walked nearly 2 miles to the neighborhood grocery store. He never begged loudly or chased after strangers asking for money. Instead, he simply sat quietly with a small cardboard sign that read, "God bless you." Some people smiled. Others pretended not to see him. Children sometimes waved, and Thomas always waved back with the same warm smile. Very few people knew that the quiet old man had once been one of the bravest soldiers in the country. 45 years earlier, Thomas had proudly worn the uniform of the United States Army. He had survived dangerous missions overseas, rescued fellow soldiers under heavy fire, and earned medals for extraordinary courage. Newspapers once called him a hero. But medals could not protect him from heartbreak. When Thomas returned home, he dreamed of living a peaceful life with his wife, Margaret, and their little son, David. For a while, everything seemed perfect. Thomas found work as a mechanic, Margaret taught music at a local elementary school, and every evening the family shared dinner together while laughing about their day. Then tragedy arrived without warning. Margaret became seriously ill. Doctors tried everything they could, but the disease spread faster than anyone expected. Thomas spent every dollar he had on treatments, hoping for a miracle that never came. The day Margaret passed away, Thomas felt as though part of his soul had disappeared with her. Grief changed him. He became quiet, distant, and buried himself in work, believing that staying busy would silence the pain. But it didn't. His son David needed a father who could talk, laugh, and heal with him. Instead, he found a man trapped inside memories. Years passed. Small misunderstandings slowly became painful arguments. One terrible night, after a heated fight neither of them truly meant, David packed a small bag and walked out of the house. Thomas believed his son would return in a few days. He never did. Thomas searched everywhere. He visited friends, relatives, and old classmates. He traveled to nearby cities following rumors that always ended in disappointment. Months became years. Eventually, the mechanic shop where Thomas worked closed its doors. Without steady income, he lost his house. The bank took everything. Soon, the decorated war hero found himself sleeping in shelters, abandoned buildings, and sometimes beneath bridges. Yet through every hardship, one thing never changed. Thomas refused to hate the world. If pain has taught me anything, he often whispered to himself, it's that everyone is fighting a battle nobody else can see. Because of that belief, he always shared whatever little he had. If another homeless person looked hungrier than he was, Thomas split his sandwich in half. If stray dogs wandered near him on cold nights, he covered them with part of his blanket. People who truly knew him often wondered how someone who had lost almost everything could still be so generous. Thomas never answered. He simply smiled. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, dark clouds covered the town. The grocery store parking lot was crowded as families hurried to finish shopping before the storm became worse. Thomas watched from his usual bench while sipping a cup of coffee a cashier had quietly given him. Across the parking lot, a young mother pushed a shopping cart toward her car. Walking beside her was a little girl with bright brown eyes, wearing a yellow raincoat and holding a small stuffed rabbit. She couldn't have been older than 8. Thomas smiled as he watched the little girl jump over tiny puddles. She reminded him of David when he was young. Suddenly, a loud screech shattered the peaceful afternoon. A delivery truck entered the parking lot far too fast. Its tires slid across the wet pavement. The driver desperately turned the steering wheel, but the truck continued skidding straight toward the little girl. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion. The mother screamed. People froze. Shopping bags dropped onto the ground. No one was close enough to reach the child. Except Thomas. Without thinking about his age, his aching knees, or the pain in his back, he threw his coffee aside and sprinted across the parking lot. Every painful step reminded him that he was no longer a young soldier. But none of that mattered. Only one thought filled his mind. Save the little girl. The truck was only seconds away. Thomas pushed harder. His lungs burned. His heart pounded. Rain soaked his clothes. The little girl stood frozen in fear. At the very last moment, Thomas reached her. Using every ounce of strength left inside him, he wrapped his arms around the child and threw both of them away from the speeding truck. The little girl rolled safely onto the grass. Thomas wasn't as lucky. The corner of the truck struck him before crashing into a parked SUV with a deafening explosion. Silence followed. For one terrifying second, nobody moved. Then people rushed toward the old man lying motionless on the rain-soaked pavement. Blood slowly mixed with the rainwater beneath him. The little girl crawled toward Thomas, tears streaming down her face. She held his trembling hand. Paramedics arrived within minutes. As they carefully lifted Thomas onto a stretcher, one of the emergency workers noticed something inside his old military jacket. A small velvet box. Curious, the paramedic opened it. Inside were several military medals wrapped beside a faded photograph. The photograph showed a young soldier standing beside a smiling woman and a little boy no older than 6. On the back of the picture were handwritten words that had nearly faded with time. My greatest victory isn't on the battlefield. It's being your husband, and David's father. The paramedic quietly wiped away tears. He realized the unconscious homeless man wasn't simply another stranger. He was someone who had once given everything for his country, and later, everything for his family. As the ambulance doors closed, dozens of people stood silently in the rain. Many of them felt ashamed. For years they had walked past Thomas without ever asking his name. Now they prayed he would survive. None of them could imagine that this single act of courage was only the beginning. Because hundreds of miles away, a man watching the evening news was about to see the face he had searched for over 30 years. And when he recognized the homeless hero lying in the hospital bed, his entire world would change forever. The evening news spread through the country faster than anyone expected. Every television station replayed the same heartbreaking footage. An elderly homeless veteran had risked his own life to save a little girl he had never met. Reporters called him a hero. Social media filled with prayers, tears, and messages from strangers who wished they had stopped to speak to the quiet old man sitting outside the grocery store. Nearly 600 miles away, in Denver, Colorado, 50-year-old David Walker had just returned home after another exhausting day at work. His wife switched on the television while preparing dinner. David barely looked at the screen until the reporter mentioned the name of the injured veteran. Thomas Walker. David froze. His heartbeat became louder than the television. The camera zoomed in on the unconscious man's face. Although the years had covered it with wrinkles and gray hair, David immediately recognized him. The gentle eyes, the scar above his left eyebrow, and the familiar smile that somehow remained even while lying in a hospital bed were impossible to forget. The coffee mug slipped from David's hands and shattered across the kitchen floor. For more than 30 years he had searched for his father. He had hired investigators, checked old military records, visited shelters, and followed countless false leads. Every search ended the same way. Nothing. Now, after 3 decades, he had finally found him. But he found him through a news report that said he might not survive the night. David drove through the darkness without stopping. His wife and teenage daughter came with him, praying every mile that they were not already too late. Back at the hospital, Thomas remained unconscious. Doctors explained that he had several broken ribs, internal injuries, and a severe concussion. Because of his age, recovery would not be easy. Outside the hospital room, the little girl Thomas had saved waited with her parents every single day. Her name was Emily. She refused to leave until the nurses assured her that the brave old man was still fighting. Emily's parents couldn't stop thinking about the sacrifice Thomas had made. They knew that without him, their daughter would not be alive. They quietly paid every medical bill the insurance refused to cover and asked the hospital to keep their names private. Meanwhile, thousands of letters arrived from strangers across the country. Schoolchildren drew pictures calling Thomas a real superhero. Veterans mailed him handwritten notes thanking him for reminding the world what courage truly looked like. Churches held prayer services. Local businesses raised money to help him rebuild his life. For the first time in years, people were speaking his name with respect. 3 days later, David finally reached the hospital. His hands shook as he stood outside room 214. He had imagined this moment for half his life, yet nothing prepared him for what he saw. The strong soldier he remembered had become a fragile old man connected to machines. David slowly walked to the bedside. Tears rolled down his face before he could speak. He gently held his father's weathered hand. That familiar touch seemed to reach Thomas somewhere deep inside his sleep. His fingers moved. His eyelids slowly opened. For several seconds, neither father nor son said anything. They simply looked at each other. 30 years of pain, regret, loneliness, and unanswered questions disappeared beneath tears that neither of them tried to hide. David finally whispered the words he had carried in his heart for decades. "I'm sorry." Thomas squeezed his son's hand as tightly as his weak body allowed. He had dreamed about this moment through thousands of lonely nights. He never stopped believing his son was alive. He never stopped loving him. The nurses quietly stepped outside, giving the family privacy while tears filled their own eyes. Over the following weeks, Thomas slowly recovered. David remained beside him every day. They talked for hours, filling the silence that had lasted 30 long years. David learned that his father had searched endlessly after he left home. Thomas learned that David had also searched, believing his father wanted nothing to do with him after their final argument. Both men realized that pride and misunderstanding had stolen decades they could never get back. They promised themselves they would never waste another day. As Thomas regained his strength, the entire town organized a special ceremony in the park. Hundreds of people attended. Veterans stood proudly in uniform. Children carried American flags. Families brought flowers. Even people who had once walked past Thomas without noticing him came to apologize. When Thomas arrived in a wheelchair, the crowd stood and applauded for several minutes. Many openly cried. The mayor presented him with the town's highest civilian honor, calling him a man who reminded everyone that true greatness comes from compassion, not wealth. Emily ran onto the stage carrying the same stuffed rabbit she had held on the day Thomas saved her life. She wrapped her arms around him and whispered that she loved him. There was hardly a dry eye anywhere in the park. 1 month later, generous donations from people across the country helped purchase a small, comfortable home for Thomas. Neighbors volunteered to paint the walls, plant flowers, and fill the kitchen with groceries. Veterans built a wheelchair ramp. Local students filled the house with handmade welcome cards. But the greatest gift arrived on moving day. David placed an old wooden piano in the living room. It had belonged to Thomas's late wife, Margaret. Years earlier, David had rescued it from storage, hoping one day his father might play it again. Thomas slowly sat before the piano. His fingers touched the keys. For a moment, the room became completely silent. Then a gentle melody filled the house. It was the same song Margaret used to play every Sunday afternoon while David sang beside her as a little boy. The music brought back memories that pain had never managed to erase. Everyone listening quietly wiped away tears. Life slowly became beautiful again. Every Sunday, Emily visited Thomas with her parents. She called him Grandpa Thomas. David and his family joined them for dinner every weekend. Laughter once again filled a home that had been empty for far too many years. Thomas often sat on his front porch watching children play in the neighborhood. People who passed by no longer saw a homeless man. They saw a hero. One evening, a young reporter asked Thomas what lesson he hoped people would remember from his story. The old veteran smiled gently before answering. He said that kindness costs nothing but can change everything. He explained that people should never judge someone by their clothes, their age, or the place where they sleep because every person carries a story that others cannot see. He believed forgiveness is stronger than anger, love is stronger than pride, and hope is stronger than despair. Those simple words spread across the country. Schools printed them on classroom walls. Veteran organizations shared them during ceremonies. Millions of people found comfort in the wisdom of a man who had once been invisible. Years later, when Thomas peacefully passed away in his sleep at the age of 85, thousands attended his funeral. Military soldiers carried his flag with honor. Emily, now a young woman, placed her childhood stuffed rabbit beside his casket. David stood proudly beside his father's portrait, grateful that life had given them a second chance before it was too late. On Thomas's gravestone were the words he had lived by every single day. A life is not measured by what we keep, but by what we give. His story continued to inspire strangers for generations, reminding them that even the smallest act of kindness can create a miracle that echoes forever. If this story touched your heart, please write "Kindness always wins" in the comments below. Your words may inspire someone who needs hope today. And before you leave, please like this video, share it with your family and friends, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories that remind us that compassion, forgiveness, and love can change lives forever.